Alicia's charm drew people in, but Daniel never imagined that the woman he married would soon be secretly involved with 6 different men, a web of betrayal so shocking that it spiraled into obsession, violence, and a crime that stunned everyone who thought they knew them. Alicia stood at the center of her wedding reception, the lights reflecting on her gown, the laughter of family and friends echoing around her. To anyone watching, she was the image of happiness, a new bride stepping into the life she had always dreamed of. Daniel, her husband, smiled at her with a look that seemed to hold nothing but love and trust. Their photographs captured a story of devotion and new beginnings. But what no one could see in those photographs was the truth Alicia carried in her heart. Beneath the veil of innocence, she was hiding a dangerous secret that threatened to destroy everything around her. Long before the wedding, Alicia had been living a life that few could have imagined. She was involved with not one man, not 2, but 6 different men at the same time. Each one believed that he was special, that he had a unique place in her world. Alicia had grown skilled in weaving lies, creating separate stories for each relationship, keeping her lives divided so that none of the men ever realized the truth. She was clever, calculating, and confident. But her choices were about to set into motion a chain of events that would unravel in the worst way possible. Her marriage to Daniel was not an act of love, but a carefully planned decision. Daniel was stable, hardworking, and devoted. He offered her the kind of security she could never have from the others. Alicia believed she could have it all, a husband who adored her and the thrill of 6 men who fed her appetite for attention and desire. She thought she had mastered the art of deception. She thought she was untouchable. The reality was far darker. Each of the 6 men was different, and in that difference lay the reason she kept them around. One of them showered her with gifts, expensive jewelry, and money that she could never have afforded otherwise. Another gave her excitement, sneaking her into places she would never have dared to go. Another filled her need for control, someone she could manipulate and dominate. Each one of them served a role in her secret life. She convinced herself that she deserved it, that she could balance them all while still maintaining the image of a loyal wife. But even at the wedding, there were cracks in the illusion. One of the men, consumed by jealousy, had tried to call her during the ceremony. She ignored it, but the vibration of her hidden phone in her purse reminded her that her 2 lives were colliding more than ever. Another man had begun asking questions about Daniel, curious about the mysterious husband she never spoke about. Alicia brushed it off with lies, but the questions kept coming. She knew she was playing with fire, but she couldn't resist. At the reception, Daniel gave a heartfelt speech, thanking his bride for choosing him, for making him feel like the luckiest man alive. His words stung Alicia in a way she hadn't expected. She felt a sharp pang of guilt, but it quickly disappeared when she remembered the thrill waiting for her in her other relationships. Her guilt was fleeting, but Daniel's trust was complete. He had no idea he was stepping into a marriage built on deception. The night of the wedding, Alicia's mind wandered constantly. While Daniel held her hand and spoke about their future, she was distracted by thoughts of the other men. She wondered if they had messaged her, if they were missing her, if any of them would start asking questions about why she suddenly went silent. She promised herself she would smooth things over with them soon, that she would find a way to keep them all satisfied without letting them discover her new marriage. But deep down, she felt the weight of risk pressing against her. The weeks leading up to the wedding had been a blur of planning and deception. She would meet one man in the morning, another in the afternoon, and spend evenings with Daniel. She would lie about errands, work schedules, and family visits. She kept multiple phones, each with different contacts and conversations. It was a carefully constructed web, and she was at the center of it, pulling every string. But no matter how careful she was, the lies were stacking higher, threatening to come crashing down on her. Daniel's family adored her. They welcomed her with open arms, calling her the daughter they had always wanted. They believed she was pure, loyal, and loving. Alicia played her part perfectly, smiling and laughing, winning their hearts with ease. Yet behind her smile, she thought of the secret she would carry into her new home. Every time she stepped into Daniel's family house, she felt a strange mixture of power and fear. Power, because she knew she was fooling them all. Fear, because she knew one wrong move could expose her. The 6 men, scattered across different parts of the city, had no idea they were sharing the same woman. Each one believed in their importance, each one convinced that Alicia belonged to him alone. She promised them time, attention, and devotion, but in truth, her promises were empty. Still, the men clung to her, blind to the reality that she was dividing herself between all of them. As the wedding night ended, Alicia drifted off to sleep beside Daniel, but her dreams were filled not with love or loyalty, but with danger. She dreamed of the 6 men discovering the truth, of Daniel finding out, of everything collapsing around her. She woke with a jolt, her heart racing, but quickly dismissed it. She told herself she was in control, that she could keep the lies alive for as long as she wanted. What Alicia didn't realize was that the first step toward disaster had already been taken. One of the men, curious and jealous, had started digging deeper into her life. He was noticing patterns, gaps in her stories, and strange inconsistencies. He wasn't ready to confront her yet, but his suspicions were growing stronger every day. For now, Alicia remained the perfect bride in Daniel's eyes, but the walls of her deception were already beginning to close in. Her wedding should have been the start of a new chapter filled with love and loyalty. Instead, it marked the beginning of a storm that would twist every life connected to hers. The perfect bride was anything but perfect. She had built her life on lies, and now the lies were preparing to destroy her. Alicia's double life grew more complicated after the wedding, and though she wore the mask of a perfect wife, her secret choices never slowed. Daniel believed their marriage was starting beautifully. He returned home from work each evening with small gifts, small conversations, and dreams of building a family. Alicia, however, remained restless. She had no intention of leaving behind the 6 men who filled the hidden corners of her existence. Each one served a purpose she refused to give up, and she believed she could continue balancing them all. What she failed to recognize was that her web of deception was beginning to fray. One of the men, Jason, had always been suspicious. He was the one who noticed details that others ignored. He had asked Alicia about her commitments, about why she disappeared so often, and though she had always offered explanations, he never fully believed her. After the wedding, his suspicion sharpened. Alicia's availability had changed. Her excuses came quicker, her stories thinner. When she told him she was traveling for family reasons, he began checking into her claims. It was a quiet investigation, one she did not yet notice, but his patience was running thin. Another man, Victor, was entirely different. He was passionate, reckless, and intensely possessive. For him, Alicia was not just a lover, but an obsession. He followed her at times without her knowledge, watching to see if she truly kept her promises. His devotion was frightening even to Alicia, but she fed it anyway. She enjoyed the way he clung to her, the way he acted as if his life depended on her attention. It gave her a sense of power, but it also planted a dangerous seed. His intensity meant that if he discovered the truth, his reaction would not be calm. Meanwhile, Daniel remained blind. He noticed only small things that he dismissed quickly. Alicia often stepped out to answer calls, claiming it was work or a friend. Sometimes she returned home later than expected, offering simple excuses. Daniel trusted her, and his love prevented him from doubting her words. Alicia relied on this trust heavily. She knew she could exploit his faith in her as long as she continued to play the role of the devoted bride. Alicia's system worked through precision. She kept different phones hidden in places where Daniel would never look. She rotated between them, answering messages and calls at carefully chosen times. She organized her schedule to make room for each man without raising suspicion. To her, it was a game of control, but to those around her, it was a series of red flags slowly surfacing. The first real crack appeared when Jason followed her one afternoon. She told him she was visiting a cousin, but he didn't believe her. Instead of confronting her, he drove quietly behind her car. He watched as she parked outside an apartment building and entered without hesitation. Hours later, she emerged, not from her cousin's apartment, but from a unit belonging to another man entirely. Jason recognized the man as someone Alicia had once claimed was just a friend. The discovery filled him with rage, but also with a hunger to learn more. He decided to wait, to gather proof before revealing what he knew. At the same time, Victor's obsession grew darker. He began sending her messages filled with questions about her whereabouts. He demanded more of her time, growing jealous whenever she gave vague answers. Alicia tried to soothe him with promises, but the intensity of his attention became harder to manage. He had begun noticing her absences too, and unlike Jason, he was less patient. His anger simmered beneath the surface, waiting for an outlet. Alicia felt the walls beginning to close in, but her solution was to push harder. She added more lies, more excuses, more elaborate stories. She told herself she was strong enough to manage everything, that no one would ever catch her. Yet the more she layered her lies, the heavier they became. She was living inside a fragile structure, one storm away from collapse. One evening, Daniel received an anonymous message at work. It was short, almost cryptic, warning him to look closer at his wife. He laughed it off at first, thinking it was some cruel prank. But the message unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. When he returned home that evening, he looked at Alicia differently. He still trusted her, still wanted to believe in her completely, but a small seed of doubt had been planted. Alicia didn't notice, or perhaps she refused to see. She went on with her games, blind to the fact that Daniel's perfect trust had been cracked. Jason, still collecting evidence, began reaching out anonymously to test Alicia. He wanted to see if she would admit to her lies under pressure. When she didn't, his anger grew sharper. He started considering not just exposing her, but destroying her. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and foolish for believing her. He convinced himself that she had played him, and he wanted revenge. Victor's behavior worsened as well. He started appearing at places unannounced, lurking near her car, waiting outside her supposed destinations. Alicia brushed it off as harmless devotion, but in truth, it was dangerous stalking. His jealousy was eating away at him, and the thought of her being with someone else was driving him toward violence. Daniel, caught in the middle without realizing it, continued his life with Alicia as if nothing was wrong. But small things bothered him more. The late-night phone calls, the rushed explanations, the times she left without clear reasons. He wanted to believe, but the anonymous warning lingered in his mind. He began quietly observing, though he had not yet reached the point of confrontation. Alicia believed she was maintaining control, but what she couldn't see was how the 6 men were shifting in dangerous ways. Some were suspicious, some were jealous, some were already planning actions against her. The balance she thought she had created was no longer balanced at all. The lies were starting to unravel, and the more she ignored the warning signs, the closer she moved toward disaster. The second chapter of her marriage was no longer about love or loyalty. It was a stage where deception deepened, where suspicions grew, and where every person around her began to change. Alicia was blind to the storm gathering around her. She thought she was clever enough to hold everything together, but every secret she carried was turning into a weapon. It was only a matter of time before those weapons were used, and when they were, no one in her world would escape untouched. The cracks in Alicia's carefully built facade widened until they could no longer be ignored. Her perfect image as Daniel's devoted wife was unraveling, though she fought to keep the mask in place. She had promised herself that she could handle everything, that her 6 lovers would never learn of each other and Daniel would never discover her lies. But the storm she had been building for months had begun to rage, and every secret was becoming harder to hide. Jason had already confirmed his suspicions. He knew she was lying and had proof that she was involved with someone else. The photographs he took of her outside another man's apartment burned in his mind. Instead of confronting her directly, he began planning to expose her in the most humiliating way possible. His anger was not only about betrayal, but about power. He wanted to watch her life collapse the way she had made him feel small and foolish. He drafted letters and slipped them into unmarked envelopes, preparing to send them to Daniel. His hands shook with rage as he imagined the destruction he was about to unleash. Meanwhile, Victor grew more unstable. His obsession had crossed a dangerous line. He began calling Alicia at odd hours, demanding answers to where she was and who she was with. When she didn't respond, he showed up uninvited, lingering in shadows or waiting near her car. His jealousy consumed him to the point where he could no longer think clearly. For him, Alicia was not just a lover. She was an addiction. He told himself that if she betrayed him, the only solution was to make sure no one else could have her. His thoughts darkened into plans of violence. though Alicia brushed off his intensity as nothing more than overbearing love. The tipping point came when Daniel received the first letter. It was not signed and carried no return address. Inside was a single photograph of Alicia entering the same apartment Jason had watched. The letter contained no explanation, only the words, "Your wife is not who you think she is." Daniel stared at it for hours, refusing to believe what his eyes showed him. He confronted Alicia with hesitation, but she was prepared. She laughed off the letter as a cruel trick, insisting that someone must be jealous of their marriage. Her charm and insistence calmed him for the moment, though a deep unease lingered. Daniel wanted to believe her so badly that he convinced himself the photograph could have been staged or misunderstood. But more letters followed. This time, there were photographs of her with another man at a cafe, her hand on his arm, her smile intimate and unmistakable. Then another set of pictures arrived, showing her entering a hotel. Each new delivery chipped away at Daniel's trust until he could no longer ignore the evidence. His heart wrestled with denial, but his mind knew the truth was closing in. He began watching her more closely, paying attention to the times she left, the excuses she made, and the inconsistencies in her stories. His blind faith was gone, replaced with suspicion that grew stronger each day. Alicia felt the shift in him. She noticed his longer silences, his colder stares, the way he seemed distant during their conversations. She tried to cover it with affection, but she could not control what was happening. At the same time, her 6 lovers were becoming harder to manage. They demanded more, asked more questions, and some began to piece together the fact that they were not the only ones in her life. The fantasy she had lived in was breaking apart, and she found herself scrambling to repair what could not be saved. One night, Daniel followed his instincts and decided to see for himself. When Alicia left, claiming she was visiting a sick relative, he followed her quietly in his car. His chest tightened as he watched her drive not to a family home but to the same apartment from the photographs. He parked at a distance and waited, watching the lights flicker on. Hours passed, and when she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. Daniel's heart sank as he saw her leave with another man, her laughter filling the night air as if she had nothing to hide. It was undeniable. His wife was living a double life, and now he had witnessed it with his own eyes. The discovery shattered something inside him. He returned home before she did, sitting in silence as he tried to process what he had seen. The woman he had trusted, the woman he believed was his soulmate, was a stranger to him now. He replayed every moment of their marriage in his mind, realizing how blind he had been. The truth was unbearable, but he couldn't confront her yet. He needed to be sure to know the full extent of her betrayal. He decided to gather his own proof, just as the anonymous sender had. While Daniel's world collapsed quietly, the men in Alicia's life began colliding in dangerous ways. Jason's letters had set the stage, but Victor's obsession was pushing things further. One evening, Victor confronted Alicia, furious at her evasive answers. His rage spilled out, and though she promised him loyalty, he didn't believe her. His threats grew darker, and Alicia realized she could no longer control him with empty promises. She felt fear for the first time, but instead of breaking off the affair, she continued juggling the others, convinced she could keep it all contained. The situation turned explosive when 2 of the men discovered each other by accident. One followed her car out of suspicion, only to see her meet another man at a restaurant. Shock turned to rage, and words were exchanged between the 2 men. Their confrontation ended in violence, leaving one of them bloodied and vowing revenge. Alicia learned of the fight only later, but by then it was too late. Her carefully constructed lies had drawn all 6 men into a spiral of jealousy and violence that she could no longer escape. Daniel received a final letter, thicker than the others. Inside was a stack of photographs, each one worse than the last. There were images of Alicia with multiple men, some unmistakably intimate. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. He could no longer look at her as the woman he married. The reality hit him with crushing force. He was living with a stranger who had betrayed him in ways he never thought possible. As Alicia returned home that night, she was greeted not by the warm smile of her husband, but by his cold silence. The air in the house had changed. Daniel no longer looked at her with love, but with suspicion and grief. Though he said nothing, Alicia felt the weight of exposure pressing down on her. She had lost control, and the storm she had been running from was finally upon her. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows or whispered suspicions. It had become undeniable, and every person in her life was ready to act on it. The men she had manipulated were consumed by jealousy and rage, and Daniel, once her shield of stability, was now preparing for a confrontation she would not be able to escape. Daniel's silence grew heavier with each passing day, and Alicia felt it every time she stepped into their home. The warmth that once filled the air had been replaced with something colder, something that pressed on her nerves. She knew his trust had weakened, though she didn't know how much he had seen or how much he already knew. Still, she refused to surrender the dangerous game she had been playing. Even as her marriage crumbled from the inside, she clung to the attention of the 6 men, convinced she could still hold everything together. But control had slipped through her fingers, and events outside her reach were quickly moving toward disaster. Daniel, though broken by what he had witnessed, kept his pain locked away. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but each time he looked into her eyes he felt his anger boiling too hot to release. Instead, he chose observation. He followed her movements when he could, watched her closely, and noted every inconsistency. The man who once adored her now studied her like a stranger, piecing together the puzzle of her betrayal. What he discovered was worse than he imagined. It was not one affair. It was many. At the same time, the men Alicia had strung along were beginning to collide in violent ways. The accidental discovery of her double dealings had turned rivalry into outright war. Jason, who had started it all with his anonymous letters, was no longer content with sending warnings. He wanted her to suffer. He told himself she had ruined his life, humiliated him, and now she would pay for it. His obsession turned into a mission to destroy not only her but anyone who stood by her. Victor's fury was reaching its breaking point. He showed up at her apartment meetings uninvited, pounding on doors and threatening those inside. He followed her car through the city, sometimes tailing her for hours until she noticed the same headlights behind her. His messages became darker, filled with warnings of what would happen if she betrayed him again. For him, the idea of her with another man was unbearable, and he was determined to eliminate the competition. Alicia's other lovers, each with their own suspicions, began confronting her in their own ways. One accused her of lying and threatened to leave. Another demanded proof of her loyalty, forcing her to make promises she could never keep. The delicate balance she once believed she controlled had collapsed completely. Instead of 6 men satisfying her needs, she now had 6 men circling her with suspicion, jealousy, and anger. The first act of violence among them happened outside a bar where Alicia had secretly met one of them. Another lover appeared, having followed her there, and confronted the man she was with. Harsh words quickly turned into fists, and the fight spilled into the street. Bystanders called the police, but both men fled before they could be caught. Alicia learned of it later, but the damage was already done. The men knew each other now, and their hatred was no longer hidden. Daniel watched from the shadows of his marriage, unaware of the full extent of the chaos, but sensing enough to know his life had been poisoned. One evening, unable to hold back his suspicion, he followed her again. This time he was prepared for whatever he might find. He watched her drive to a small apartment complex, her face calm as if she had no secrets at all. He parked in silence, his heart pounding as he waited. Minutes later, he saw her meet not 1 man, but 2. The sight broke him in ways he hadn't thought possible. His hands shook on the steering wheel, his chest felt tight, and all he could think was that the woman he had married had been a lie from the beginning. He left before she returned home, his mind dark and clouded. He didn't confront her that night, but something inside him shifted. The thought of exposing her publicly crept into his mind, the idea of revealing her web of affairs to the world. His love had burned away, replaced with anger and shame. The man who once wanted nothing more than to protect her was now preparing to bring her down. Alicia, oblivious to how much Daniel knew, tried to maintain her lies with the men who were still clinging to her. She spun new stories, promised new beginnings, and begged for patience, but her words had lost their power. The men were no longer satisfied with promises. They wanted ownership, revenge, and control. One of them broke into her phone when she carelessly left it unattended during a meeting. What he found confirmed everything. dozens of messages, secret photos, and plans with other men. He snapped screenshots, sent them to himself, and left without telling her. Within hours, those screenshots began circulating among the others. Each man received proof that they were not the only one. The realization hit them like fire, fueling their anger into action. The chaos reached Daniel's doorstep when one of the men, blinded by rage, showed up at their home. He shouted from outside, demanding to see Alicia, hurling threats into the night. Daniel, furious and humiliated, confronted him on the front lawn. The argument escalated into a fight, neighbors calling the police as they watched the struggle unfold. By the time officers arrived, the man had fled, leaving Daniel standing in the yard with bruises and rage carved into his face. The police questioned Daniel, but he said little. He couldn't bring himself to tell them the truth, not yet. But inside, he knew his marriage was beyond repair. His wife was at the center of something poisonous, something that had already spilled into violence and would only grow worse. He looked at her differently now, not as his partner, but as the spark that had ignited a fire destined to burn everything it touched. Alicia, cornered from every direction, began to feel the pressure she once ignored. She had thought she could manage everything, but now she was being hunted by jealousy, suspicion, and anger. She could no longer keep the men apart. They knew of each other, they despised each other, and they despised her even more. Her world, once filled with thrills and control, was crumbling into chaos. Daniel no longer cared to protect her. He began gathering his own evidence, preparing for the inevitable moment when he would end their marriage and reveal who she truly was. The men, meanwhile, simmered in anger, their obsession with her twisting into dangerous intentions. And Alicia, blinded by her own choices, could only watch as the storm she created closed in from every side. The stage was set for tragedy, and though she tried to convince herself she still had control, the truth was undeniable. The lies were over. The rivalries had turned violent. Her marriage was dead, and danger was waiting at her door. The final days of Alicia's tangled web unfolded like a slow-motion disaster, each moment pushing her closer to a fate she could no longer escape. What had begun as a secret indulgence, a reckless game of deception, had spiraled into a storm that drew everyone into its violence. Daniel no longer saw her as his wife, but as the architect of his humiliation. The 6 men no longer saw her as their lover, but as the reason their lives had collided in rage and jealousy. And Alicia, once so confident in her control, now stood in the middle of it all with fear growing in her chest. The first sign of the end came with a late-night message. One of her lovers, overwhelmed with anger after seeing the screenshots of her other affairs, warned her that he was coming to her house. The tone of the message was cold, filled with fury that could not be soothed by words. Alicia panicked and tried to reach out to him, but he ignored her. She paced the living room, her hands trembling, while Daniel watched her with silent contempt. He knew she was afraid, but he didn't yet know the reason why. All he could see was the fear in her eyes and the phone she clutched tightly, and in that silence his suspicions became certainty. Hours later, headlights appeared outside their home. A car pulled up and heavy footsteps echoed on the driveway. Daniel moved toward the window, his jaw tightening as he saw a man approaching. The stranger's face was twisted with anger, his fists clenched as he shouted Alicia's name. Daniel's chest burned with fury. His humiliation had arrived at his doorstep once again, and this time he refused to back down. He stepped outside, confronting the man before Alicia could stop him. The argument was heated, words filled with betrayal and rage. Neighbors watched from their windows as voices rose, and the tension escalated into a violent fight. The struggle was brutal. Daniel swung with the desperation of a man who had lost everything, while the other man fought with the fury of betrayal. Blows landed, blood spilled, and the sound of fists striking echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Alicia screamed for them to stop, but her words carried no power anymore. The fight ended only when Daniel, stronger and fueled by rage, overpowered the man and left him sprawled on the lawn, barely conscious. When the police arrived, the attacker was taken away, and Daniel stood shaking, his knuckles bloodied, his chest heaving with rage. But this was only the beginning. The other men had already seen the proof of her betrayals, and whispers of revenge passed between them. They no longer hated only her. They hated each other. Each believed the others had stolen something from him. Each believed he deserved to be the only one. Their jealousy became a shared obsession, and soon they began following her not just separately, but together, circling her life like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. Daniel's patience finally broke. One evening, after days of silence, he confronted Alicia directly. He told her he knew everything, that he had seen her with other men, that the letters and photographs had been real. His voice was filled with disgust, his words sharp and cutting. Alicia tried to deny it, tried to plead, but her mask had no power left. Daniel told her their marriage was over, that she had destroyed every ounce of trust he had ever given her. He walked out of the house, leaving her alone in the darkness with nothing but the weight of her lies. Her life unraveled quickly after that. The men who once adored her now stalked her with threats. She couldn't step outside without feeling eyes watching her. Phone calls came at all hours, voices warning her that she would pay for what she had done. She tried to cut ties, but it was too late. The men had become obsessed beyond reason. She was no longer their lover, but their target. The breaking point arrived one stormy night. Alicia returned home after a frantic day of trying to escape the chaos. She locked the doors, closed the curtains, and sat in the dim glow of a single lamp. Her hands shook as she scrolled through messages on her phone, threats from one man, angry pleas from another, silence from Daniel, who had vanished from her world. Her chest tightened as she realized the walls were closing in on every side. Outside, shadows moved. One of the men had followed her home, and he was not alone. Two others appeared minutes later, their cars parked along the street. They gathered in silence, their hatred uniting them in a twisted purpose. They were no longer rivals but conspirators, each one convinced that Alicia deserved punishment for her lies. The pounding on the door shattered the silence. Alicia froze, her breath caught in her throat. The pounding grew louder, the voices harsher, demanding that she open the door. She backed away, her heart racing, but the lock gave way under the force of their anger. They stormed inside, faces contorted with rage. What happened next unfolded in chaos. Furniture crashed to the floor, Alicia screamed, and the men shouted over one another, their fury boiling over. They pushed her, cornered her, and fought among themselves in the process. The violence was explosive, uncontrolled, and filled with blind hatred. By the time it ended, the living room was in ruins, and Alicia lay broken on the floor, her body marked by the consequences of her own deception. The police arrived hours later after neighbors reported the noise and screams. The men were gone, scattered into the night, but the damage had been done. Alicia was barely alive, her body a map of the chaos that had consumed her. She was rushed to the hospital, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would never leave her. The investigation revealed everything. The letters, the photographs, the multiple affairs, the violent confrontations. Daniel, now separated from her, gave his account to the authorities with a hollow expression. The men were hunted down one by one, each facing charges for their roles in the attack. The truth was exposed in headlines, her name whispered in disgust, her story told as a warning. Alicia, once the perfect bride in the eyes of her community, became infamous. Her story was no longer about love or happiness, but about betrayal, obsession, and destruction. She had believed she could live in a world built on lies, that she could keep everyone under her control. But in the end, her lies turned into weapons that destroyed everything around her. The 6 men she had used, the husband she had betrayed, the life she had built on deception, all of it collapsed into tragedy. What remained was not the thrill she once chased, but a legacy of pain, shame, and violence. Her name would forever be tied to a cautionary tale, a bride who thought she could play with fire, only to be consumed by the flames.